Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the members of the public who have joined us today. I would like to acknowledge that we're holding this meeting on the traditional territory of Coast Salish First Nations and call our regular board meeting to order. We have the agenda before us. Mr. Berry, do you have any changes to that agenda?
No new business?
Thank you. Any member of the board have anything? Seeing no hands up, a motion to adopt the agenda, moved by Director Morrison, second by Director Jackson. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. The minutes are before you under M1. If there are no errors or omissions, a motion to adopt. Moved by Director Day, second by Director Yoni DiNardo. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving down to the public input period, I would like to invite forward anyone who wishes to speak for up to 3 minutes on an item on the agenda. Mr. Evans.
Thank you.
What a surprise.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, this morning I watched the Regional Services Committee meeting, in particular the item on the airport. Mr. Chair, I've seen the presentation given here by the Duncan Flying Club, and it was a very good presentation, but I feel that the CVRD is overloaded with work now, and they shouldn't be taking this on. We heard a suggestion this morning from the Commission that maybe this should come in a form of an application for a grant in aid and let them run this. I don't think that the CVRD should be taking on any more work, because we take on this work, then we need more staff. We are putting in, I think it was $25,000 towards this, and the taxpayers are overloaded now. We just received the report 10 minutes ago, and I think that these reports should be given to the public and let them have some input before we rush these things through. I see that this is up for a recommendation, and I would hope that this board would recommend that they refer this or to shelve it and ask the Flying Club to put in a grant and aid. No one wants an airport by their place. We have an airport at Shawnigan Lake. It's on the water. We have one at Maple Bay. It's on the water. We have another airstrip by Dugan's Lake, a private one. We have another one in Mill Bay at Jackson's Farm. As the crow flies, the Pat Bay Airport is not very far away from the electoral area. If we run up to North Oyster area, we have another airport. I think the airport is great. We don't know when Mr. Butler will actually want to mine that gravel to take that strip away from the Duncan Flying Club. But please, I would plead with this board not to take on any more work. You can break the best horse's back, and you can work them to death, and I think that's what's happening to the staff of the CVRD. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Is there anyone else who would like to make a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Directors. I have stood up before you on previous occasions, and Director Acton has also raised the issue of when we have a meeting in the morning and the items are discussed and then presented at the board in the afternoon, it does not allow the public to have comment, especially when there's verbal reports. There's no opportunity for the public to have input if it's adopted in the same day or even within a few days. We saw some pretty substantial information that was delivered prior to the long weekend, And even the directors here noted that they did not have time, because usually when there's a long weekend, the agenda is published on the Thursday, and the staff or the directors and the public have an opportunity to review it. Prior to the last long weekend, the agenda was published on Friday. Another thing that I've noticed, and it's happened both at the board meeting, the ESC, and at the regional services this morning, where the different groups have gone into recess and discussed items, and I will give the example of the referenda topics, where only yourself and I believe the CAO and finance minister or manager had a private meeting and then came back. So that excluded the directors from being part of that. I've also noticed last ESC, I believe, there was a development application for Cowichan Bay, and there was a whispered conversation between the land use services manager and the chair of the ESC, and then the land use manager and the director for the area, and then the item was referred back to staff. Where is, and even this morning with the economic development, there was a whispered conversation between a manager and a staff member that the public didn't get to be part of. I'm asking, where is the open and transparency in a public meeting if these whispered conversations are happening? Why aren't they being discussed beforehand? Maybe that report was not ready to come before the committee or the board. So that's my statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Seeing no one coming forward, we can carry on with the agenda. Thank you. And we can move to our delegations. And Mr. Luke Acker, are you? Yes, you are here now to talk about WinFest. Welcome. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having me. Before I begin, I just want to ask some questions of the floor. Who has heard of Knit
Could
Nat
you
Lake?
press your button on
Press my button.
the? Yeah. Thank
Okay,
you.
button's on.
Yeah.
Who has heard of Knit Nat Lake in this room? Awesome. Okay. Well, my goal here is to inform you a little bit about the tourism potential of Knit Nat Lake, and also what I'm involved in, which is WinFest, the Canadian National Kiteboarding Championships there. Knit Nat Lake is an absolute goldmine in terms of tourism. It draws thousands of people every year. It's known around the world as one of the top 10 places to kiteboard. So I would akin this to having Squamish or Whistler in your backyard for the CVRD. Everyone knows about Tofino, and when you go to Tofino, you stop at wineries, you visit hotels along the way, and our hope is that the draw of Knit Nat Lake will sort of blossom into this tourism, sports tourism potential that I think it has. I'd like to just kick off with showing our event video for 2018. WinFest has been going on for approximately 23 years. We're incorporated as a nonprofit society in the Cowichan Valley Regional District. And every year for the last 5 years, we've produced a video which is shared in kiteboarding magazines and around other publications, which really show the tourism potential of, is there sound? How do I turn the sound down?
Okay, everybody is awake now.
Okay, good. All right, let's try this.
Back in the day it was all good, running our mouths and picking a bud. We had a verse to rhyme and a beat to ride, singing, this is who I am. We don't need money to get by, because my friends keep me feeling so high. We're so smart and tired, I'll never wonder why, 'cause baby, this is who I am.
the cage on the main stage. Part-time Steve been it for 3 days. Move up the front, pull out the fresh shades and freeze. Oh, this the place and it's getting crazy. Leg up Scott dudes and a bunch of ladies. Well, Cam's the name, but nah, he's not lazy. Do it all day, 7 to week, you parade. Make him out, say leg up, step on, that's me. Whose pictures on your phone, that's me. A good band needs at least 2 Steves. And the first is me, the second one is a G.
I'm the Stevie, it's the G's with the G, it's the Steves. My family would feed on that government cheese. When I was a little shorty before I could MC, my single mama would be working on her hands and knees, trying to get some food up on the table.
What I wanted this video to convey, and I think it did a good job, is that this is a really special event that happens every year. It's got sports, athleticism draw, and it also is a free music festival that draws in families and friends, and it sells the whole Cowichan and Valley experience. So my purpose of being here today is to let you, the council, know about the event. It happens every year. We're growing very fast. This is our largest year ever with almost 500 or 600 people attending. And this is at Nitnat Lake, so it's really out there. And we're reaching the limits of our capacity as organizers, where we have to think about, safety and logistics. So we're hoping that next year, not at this meeting, but in the future, we will apply for a regional grant and aid to help us put this on, with the promise that we'll work towards selling the region as a tourism destination. You're going to Winfest, stop at a wine yard, stop at a hotel, stop at a B&B, check out the Cowichan Bay, etc. I guess for the last few minutes of the presentation, I'd like to open it up to any questions that may be floating around.
Thank you very much. Did I recognize Director Morrison in that bear suit there?
That's a good point.
I just thought maybe it was. Director Marcotte.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to you, to the delegate. What kind of an impact does that have on the chum that are in that lake?
Good question. Basically none. The kiteboarders emit no fuel or, it's a very low impact sport. I guess the comparison would be motorized sports, and if you use that as your baseline, this is significantly better.
Do the people clean up after themselves, et cetera? Does it leave it in the same position for Mother Nature underneath the water?
Well, I'm not aware of people depositing trash in the water. As you can tell, we're not bringing anything other than the kiteboard with us in the water. But at the campsite, yeah, it's a pack-in, pack-out policy. There's no trash receptacles in the campsite.
Thank you.
I just want to acknowledge the support we've had from Ian Morrison in sort of growing this, and he's been instrumental towards this. So, thank you.
Director Jackson.
Thank you. When are your dates for next year, Luke?
We're going to hope to have it the weekend before the long weekend in August, so it'll be the last weekend in July.
Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Luke. Luke, thanks for coming. I applaud you for coming, because we meet in many groups in the community and we'll say, come to the board and, keep telling us all about you. So it's really great. And you've come before, and I would like to support you in the future, but also I'd like to think of some way that maybe with the Shawnigan Lake director and Mill Bay director, maybe you could come to Mill Bay and give some instructions and be an ambassador for the sports, and then that might encourage people to go out there. But the issue, my whole family does water sports, and that we would love to come out, but what has held us back from going there is the talk of the road going out there.
That's a very good point you raised, Director Nicholson, or Acton, apologies. Yeah, the road is a blessing and a curse. I have a love-hate relationship with it. It's terrible driving up there, but it keeps the crowds away, and it keeps this place special. If the road were paved, we wonder if the lake would become sort of overpopulated, unless there were additional campsites built on other areas of the lake. As it stands right now, there's one campsite, and it's at capacity almost right away. So,
Thank you. Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't able to get out there this year, so it wasn't me in the bear suit, but I just want to share something that was a bit of a surprise for me when I was out there 2 years ago. And you know, a lot of fun was had by all. It was a great event when I was out there. But the big surprise for me was, and this isn't disparaging to people with Volkswagen vans, but that's kind of what I was thinking we'd see out there, was a lot of Volkswagen camper vans and people in pup tents and the likes. And what was a big surprise for me was that this is a sport that I think people from all ages, all socioeconomic backgrounds participate in. Yes, there were the pup tents. Yes, there were a few Volkswagen vans, but there were also some really high-end 4x4s and campers and RVs that were out at this. And it seems to attract a broad range of participants and viewers as well. And I'm really thankful that you guys can do such a great video each year showing you know what a good event it is. I'm looking forward to them coming back and presenting to the board and maybe a little bit more about the economics of this, because there's a lot of people braved the road to go out there, and I think that we'll see this grow into an even bigger event. So great job, and good luck next year as well.
Thank you. Just a momentary oversight. I'd like to welcome our alternate directors, Sebring and McGuire. Director McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clear something up. It was me in the bear suit. Okay. One day, dreams come true. I was wondering if you've had an opportunity to work with the First Nation out there in the event or preparing for it and managing it.
That's an excellent question. Windfest doesn't happen without the approval of the chief. I believe his name is Jack Thompson. And every year we negotiate the terms of the event. And the terms are always centered around how much economic impact we can bring into that village. So we make sure that they do all the catering for the event. We make sure that their arts and crafts and wares are front and center. We have worked with the camp supervisors to ensure that every single person pays for camping. And 300 people at $25 a day adds up pretty quick, or even 500 people. So the economic impact is, to be quite frank, is significant for the village. But in terms of the CVRD, there's a lot more we could do. And I hope that in the future we sort of sell this as a destination point and sort of sell the other places you could visit on the way there.
Thank you. Director Dory.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm interested in who owns the land around where your event is? How much land is there available for campsites and development and that sort of thing? So, that would be important moving forward. So what's the situation there?
That's an excellent question and a timely one too. Currently there's a treaty negotiation happening between the Ditida and the province, where they have recently agreed to transition the land from the province to the Ditida for them to benefit from its tourism potential and develop as they see fit. There is quite a bit of land, but it hasn't been invested in because the Ditida had not had title. And now that I believe they have title, with the immense tourism draw of the area, I believe that we will see the campground expand and investment in the area on behalf of the Ditida to really capitalize on that.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Nicholson.
Oh, my question was asked, but thanks so much for coming. I really think it's a great event.
Thank you. Director Kuhn.
How many people attend your main event there? And how many people do you think are there on an average weekend?
That's a good question. I have to draw a distinction between participants, like competitors, and spectators, because everybody, fair enough. So I would say between 400 and 600 every year. I think we were around 500 last year. We don't have tallies at the door, but every single camp space is doubled up at this event. The unwritten rule of NITNAT during WindFest is if you can fit your tent in a spot, it's good to go. So it's over capacity for sure, but I think that brings a lot of revenue into the lake. Now to your second question, which was how many are there on a regular weekend? Not as many, but quite a few. As WindFest has sold the region and sold the destination as a kiteboarding location, we've seen NITNAT grow every year in terms of its regular weekend occupancy.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Acker, for coming in today, and thank you for that video, which was startling.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay. Moving on, I'd like to welcome forward Mary Lowther, Massachi Lake resident who wants to talk about proposed eradication of invasive plants.
Thanks. Steve, can I close this? Yep, go ahead.
Does that work? Hi, my name is Mary Lowther, and I'm from Massachi Lake in Area F, where our director is Director Ian Morrison. And the chair of our Parks and Parks Commission, David Lowther, said he wanted to be here as Veritas. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, it means that this is a serious issue and he'd like to be here. He had Miss Kemp for his Latin teacher in school, and he would have crawled across broken glass for her to like him. So he really likes Latin. He even bought a book that has some Latin phrases in it, including that one. So he likes to practice on me once in a while, because he doesn't get to practice very often. One of the phrases he learned was, you better leave now and take your camel with you. And I have a catapult in my back pocket, so give me all your money. He never gets to use that, so he says, in veritas, and now I have learned it. But anyway, he can't come today because Wednesday afternoon he always gives our neighbor a ride for grocery shopping, and that's more important. Anyways, fortunately, my friend and neighbor, Dr. Brenda Bernhardt, is here with me because this is a vital issue for her too. And she knows a lot more about this subject than I do, so she's a good person to have around. Anyway, I'm here because Director Morrison dropped off a pamphlet regarding the invasive plants in the CVRD and for my husband, for David, about what the CVRD is doing about the invasive plants. So I read it and I told David all about what was in it. And so I learned in particular that the giant hogweed is a highly invasive, lovely to look at, but very poisonous plant, kind of like something out of a horror movie. And so the CVRD, I met with Graham Giddon, and the CVRD has looked into the least harmful way of dealing with this horrible plant. And the workers have to go out there with hazmat suits on, and I'm sure you guys are up on this. But I found out they've got to be all covered, and they've got to double bag the plant. They cut it down, and then they inject it with Roundup or glyphosate. So I looked it up, and I found out a bit more about it, and it's long been considered the weed killer of choice because the promulgators told us for years and years that it's the least harmful herbicide around, that it doesn't stay in the water, and that it's just fine to use. So understandably, that's what the CVRD has been using. But recent studies have shown that Roundup, et cetera, are far from innocuous. Director Morrison told me that a lot of you are up on this already, but there might be a few more things that you're not aware of. So I've just got a couple of things here to say. And Roundup and Enlist both contain glyphosate. In 2014, Roundup, which this product is made by Dow Chemical actually, they had to add 2,4-D to both herbicides because the weeds were becoming increasingly resistant to glyphosate. So they added 2,4-D, which is found in Agent Orange. And those of you who are as old as me probably remember that it was used as a defoliant in the Vietnamese War. And the World Health Organization in 2016 declared glyphosate as probably carcinogenic to humans. This is a conservative body who, you know, they've got to have these facts overwhelming before they'll even say that. They had, quote, convincing evidence that the chemical caused cancer in lab animals. They also classified 2,4-D as possible carcinogen, so you got the cocktail. So I've brought a few books. I have an arsenal of gardening books, and these ones refer to the dangers of glyphosate or Roundup. They're not very long. Steve Solomon, my go-to guru fellow for gardening west of the Cascades, he's just awesome. He has written this latest book. And in here, he used to use Roundup, actually. He has written about it. So in this book, he says, I've recently discovered that the chemical does accumulate in the soil. The stuff does not break down rapidly into harmless byproducts. Allow it to accumulate, and the nutritional content of the crops being grown drops because glyphosate prevents the uptake of trace elements. And now there is strong evidence that glyphosate itself is far more toxic than we were originally told. This is a recent book I bought. It's a really great nutrition book by Stephen R. Gundry, MD. He is the director of the International Heart and Lung Institute in Palm Springs, California. This is what he has to say, among other things. I'm just giving you a little bit. The Organic Consumers Association and the Feed the World Project teamed up to offer the public the opportunity to have their water or urine tested for glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup. According to results released in May 2016, 93% of the urine samples tested positive for glyphosate, with children showing the highest levels. In 2013, El Salvador banned this endocrine-disrupting agent because it was linked to the deaths of thousands of agricultural workers from chronic kidney disease. And the European Union continues to ban the use of Roundup in all the European Union countries, a position diametrically opposed to that of the United States. There's a lot more, I'm just showing you a few here. The Rodale Organic Encyclopedia of Organic Gardening. This is a great encyclopedia, by the way. They say, herbicides accumulate in our water supply.
Table with the elbow grease, you would cook and we clean. We were working as a team.
I hit
My
some.
three sisters.
You're back to Windfest, I think.
Okay, at least it wasn't as loud. All right,
Pretty good trick, though.
thank you. For my next act, Michael Antonio.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to jump in.
Oh, so someone wants to get in. Michael Antonio, PhD, British geneticist, has conducted tests revealing that ultra-low doses of Roundup administered to rats in drinking water produce liver and kidney damage over the long term. And these doses are thousands of times lower than what regulators say is completely safe for consumption. Another recent study found Roundup adversely affects the development of female rats' uteruses, increasing the risk for both infertility and uterine cancer. Charles Benbrook of Washington State University shows in a new scientific study that because herbicide-tolerant crops were so widely used, those few weeds that could withstand glyphosate had a field day in the fields. Slowly but surely, weeds resistant to glyphosate began to infest fields, and farmers had to apply herbicides more often and in higher doses to control them.
Just a note that you have about 2 minutes left.
I knew I was going to go over. Okay. Thanks. Gee. And this master's student at the University of Guelph studied giant hogweed her particular, that's what she particularly was studying, she quotes, Roundup doesn't even control the seedlings that pop up and in general doesn't have any soil control. You spray it, you kill off what's there, and new seedlings pop up 4 months later. Saanich has restricted the use of Roundup as well as other traditional products containing synthetic chemicals. And we have seen spraying done in the ball field across from where I live, and we don't know what it is. Some people are afraid to even take their dogs for a walk there. I spoke with Graham Giddon, and he doesn't know what it is they put on there, but there's no dandelions, so we don't know what's there. And also, our neighbor, we're starting to hopefully garden down the road from us. We bought some property. We're going to maybe have a little farm there. The neighbor was talking about spraying Roundup to get rid of this gorse whatever stuff, and my husband is still trying to get him to stop using it. But, you know, I talked to people on the Cowichan Agricultural Society and asked them how they deal with it, because most of them are organic farmers. They can't do anything about it, you know. So if the neighbors do it and it contaminates their soil, what can they do? So there are other alternatives. I talked to Graham about it, and I don't have time to tell you right now, but they're really good alternatives. So what I'm asking the board, I'll pass these around. I've made copies of this, and there's one for each of you. And what I'm asking is, I'm hoping that you'll read my suggested sheet here and come up with something similar that I can present to the Minister of Environment, because I realize the CVRD has no jurisdiction over private ownership. But also, if you would look at that and consider it yourself about the dangers of using these chemical products.
Great. Thank you very much, and thank you for doing the research on this and bringing it forward here today. Are there any questions from the board? Director Acton?
Hi, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for coming in today. I was thinking about the same thing just recently. I went to a barbecue, someone on the lake, and their yard that's on the lakeside had weeds, and their yard on the street side had no weeds. And I said, well, that's interesting, your yard, how it has weeds in the front and not in the back. And he said, well, it's close to the lake, so I don't put any weed killer on that side. And I just thought, oh, really? That doesn't make any difference to me in my mind. That's still running into the lake. So I thought, well, surely there must be something we can do with land use that we can regulate, at least around drinking water source, what you can use on your lawn and what you can't.
And Saanich has a bylaw. They can do that. They've limited, they've restricted the use of glyphosate and other traditional chemical uses. And if you want to use it, you have to apply for a special permit. And I've written that down there. That's municipality. Yeah, that's why I have to go to the Minister of Environment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Director Jackson?
Yes, thank you. Through you to staff, I would imagine. Duncan hasn't used Roundup for probably 10 or 12 years. I think they use a combination of physical removal and probably vinegar or something.
Yeah.
Who's the person that would make that kind of decision?
I'm not sure that we have anyone here today that can respond to any questions
Okay.
like that.
But would this be
Probably
something
Mr.
that
Farquhar in
the
Parks
board
or-
would ask, or?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So maybe I would like to ask this to be referred to staff for
Sure.
whatever staff does with it.
Yeah,
Thank
seconded
you.
by Director Yanni DiNardo. I'll call the question. All in favor and opposed, motion carries. I want to thank you, from my personal point of view, first things I heard about Roundup was that it was so safe, that it broke down so quickly. And then I read something about the half-life and how it actually does not break down quickly. And the half-life might be 30 days, but then, that means there's half left, and it goes on, and it actually can be far more persistent than we were led, I believe, to understand. So I appreciate you bringing it forward today.
Okay, thank you. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
listening.
Okay, we can move on to committee and commission reports. I'm sorry, report of the chairperson. Here we go. First of all, Mr. Carruthers, can you remind us of the public meeting dates for the referenda information? And I know we have one tonight.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll ask staff to correct me if I get my dates wrong. We have a meeting tonight at 6:30 at the United Church in Duncan for the central area of our regional district. We have another meeting on October the 9th at the Mill Bay Community League Hall in Mill Bay. And we also have a meeting on Thetis Island next week, I believe, on Tuesday at 6:30 p.m.
Okay, thank you. Quite a busy schedule, and I was able to get to the one at the Aggie Hall Monday night, and I want to say that Mr. Carruthers did a fantastic job of providing the information to the public, and he was supported by other staff, and including Kate Miller, and they did a great job. Second thing I wanted to talk about was the Community Excellence Awards at UBCM, and the CVRD was the recipient of this award as an honorable mention in excellence in governance for the 2050, Cowichan 2050 Regional Collaboration Framework. And I think this is a good award that reminds us of something very positive that was initiated here, I think through staff, but it came to the board for approval. And I just want to say that Director Marcotte stole the show when we went up to have our picture taken in her usual style. It was Mary at the front of the picture, and it was quite fun. Anyways, Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd also like to commend the staff for bringing this forward and being so visionary and moving us in that direction and thinking a little differently. And the 2050 series has been really valuable. So I'd like to also thank everyone involved.
Thank you. And I have an item that Director Morrison would like to report on, that something he attended on our behalf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On, I think it was Monday, I attended an event at the Nanaimo Airport, and it was our friends at the Vancouver Island Economic Alliance who were, they've been working on this project for 3 years. There's a press release that I've provided to directors and also an information piece. And the long and the short of it is, they have succeeded in receiving a designation as a foreign trade zone, FTZ, for the entirety of Vancouver Island. And it's a pretty big deal, as I understand it, because, and I don't know the specific details, and you can read it and find out more information at their websites, but my understanding is that these foreign trade zones are usually a fairly small geographical area that is limited to ports and airports and the likes, and it's a really significant achievement to have had Vancouver Island in its entirety designated a foreign trade zone, and just wanted to let everybody know there were representatives of big businesses and different groups, Port Alberni, and a number of elected officials and organizations that were in attendance. And pleased to provide you with this information, and there's more information available on their website. So that's what I wanted to share with everyone today.
Thank you. Director Sebring.
Just wanted to add, I was at that event too, and what struck me, VIEA, Vancouver Island Economic Alliance, is the first non-governmental organization to actually be given the ability to manage one of these foreign trade zones. Normally it's a government agency like an airport authority or a port authority. In this case, VIEA has taken the whole thing on. And it's a fabulous project, particularly in terms of the export market for some of the things we do here. It's primarily aimed at that. One of the references was to the deep sea ports that are available from Crofton to Port Hardy, was how they put it in their slide. So we're definitely, in our region, definitely considered very much part of that package. So good stuff.
Thank you. And thank you, Director Morrison. So we'll move on to committee and commission reports and turn back to Director Morrison for the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and wow, this is a short one, so from our September 19th meeting, we report and recommend as follows for electoral area directors only, that the landscape security policy as amended at the September 19th, 2018 Electoral Area Services Committee meeting be approved, and that the landscape security policy dated December 12th, 2012 be repealed, and I move that.
Seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any question on this? All in favor and opposed? Motion carries.
And that's it.
Thank you, Director Morrison. Director Yanni DiNardo, Regional Services Committee, on a separate page, we have some recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was held earlier today. Sorry? I'd like to
Certainly.
pull out number two, so it'll be number 1 and number 3. I'm moving number 1 and 3, and I'll read them out. The Regional Services Committee reports and recommends the following: that an application to the Agricultural Land Commission be submitted for approval to construct and maintain the Cowichan Valley Trail within the Agricultural Land Reserve across the Cowichan Exhibition Society property at 7380 Trans-Canada Highway. 2 of 1, that a statutory right-of-way agreement in favor of the Cowichan Valley Regional District be approved for registration on the Cowichan Exhibition Grounds property, legally described as Section 13, Range 5, Somenos Land District for the Cowichan Valley Trail, inclusive of the terms and conditions outlined in the Parks and Trails Division staff report dated August 22nd, 2018. Number 3, that the Cowichan Search and Rescue Society be granted a license of occupation over bays 1 and 2 at Bings Creek facility effective August 1st, 2018 to October 1st, 2019.
Seconded by Director Jackson. Any question on these? I'll call the question then. All in favor and opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Number 2, that an airport feasibility study be undertaken for the Cowichan region that would examine the financial, operational, and governance considerations for creating an economical, viable, sustainable facility.
Seconded by Director Stone, Director Acton, then Director Kuhn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make a comment that someone from the public here had mentioned that we should, a possibility of putting it to the public if it was a route that they wanted us to go down. So interestingly enough, I did actually put that report on my Facebook page this week, and that was by far my busiest post. And only I had many comments, and only one comment was actually in for going forward with this.
Thank you. Director Kuhn.
Yeah, I would like to refer back to Mr. Evans as well. Is there a misunderstanding there? Were we supposed to be, with this motion, involved in the operation or anything like? I didn't think that was the case.
I'm going to ask Ms. Melmock to come forward to answer that question and explain what this resolution means in terms of the Economic Development Division's involvement.
I think it's important to go back to the origins of how this arose. Over a year ago, I was approached by the Duncan Flying Club vis-a-vis the fact that their airport, their airstrip, may in fact be no longer viable in the coming few years. And within that framework, they also talked about the fact that as a flying club, they're not only concerned with their own operations, but with the viability of whether, as a community, we need to look at options for having an airstrip in the region. And those considerations were around the fact that, around emergency, safety, etc. And they were also around considerations about whether, as other sectors develop in our region, whether it would be viable. So that was the history of how the approach was made to me. My practical approach to what they were asking was to say, it sounds to me as though you need a feasibility study. Vis-a-vis what a future facility might look like in this region if it were to go beyond the confines of a small flying club. So that was the genesis, something that was just, run by, of what the conversation was and how we got to the point of requesting a feasibility study through the board and through the presentation, through the Duncan Flying Clubs, because in their position, they're advocating for the future of essentially not only private flyers in the region, but the air as a transportation activity in our region. And from an economic development standpoint, I felt it was incumbent upon me to at least bring the discussion forward. It is completely the board's purview if they decide that this feasibility study would rest better as an initiative of the Duncan Flying Club or from an economic development Cowichan standpoint. But from an economic development Cowichan standpoint, I was interested in pursuing this as a feasibility study so that we could look at the broad range of issues related to air transport in our region.
Thank you. Director Kuhn, you wanted to?
Yes, I'd like to just make a statement. If the plan was, or if there's at all a possibility of us getting involved, or the CVRD getting involved in actively operating that airport or being involved in any active way, I would be dead against that.
Thank you. Director Nicholson.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think we're anywhere close to talking about whether we would move forward and get
No.
involved. I think this is really about being proactive on what I think is an important land use question. And I know that it will eventually come up because I have spoken with Butler Brothers, and I think in their minds, one of the reclamation ideas they have for their gravel pit on Langtree Road is to, well, they'll mine out underneath the existing airport. I think that they have plans to request zoning to allow them to put an airstrip in to replace that eventually. So it's going to be an important land use question in my community, and I think it's really important to be proactive about this and have done some feasibility study and understand really what the best site location would be for the area if we were to go ahead with an airport.
Thank you. Director Dory.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The resolution speaks to the fact that they were going to do a feasibility study. Now, we still didn't decide where the money is going to come from. Is it going to come from a grant and aid? Is it going to come from the economic development budget? Does staff have the power to make that decision, or do they have to come back here and get further approval to do that?
Mr. Carruthers?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My understanding from the discussion this morning is that this is simply approval of this committee to submit that project. That will go through the 2019 budget process. It'll require drawing down on our operating reserves. So this is simply a motion of this committee to bring that project forward. As it was said earlier by Mr. Kieber, this committee can't fetter the decision of the future board in respect to the budget. So.
Director Acton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I still believe that the proper route for this to go would be the Flying Club can organize this and manage this and apply for a grant and aid and then come to us with their feasibility study and can say, okay, now this is what we've discovered and this is what we've done and now we might need your help in these certain areas. So if I had someone to second that motion, I would create, or an amendment to the motion, I would do that.
You have to make a motion for someone to
So,
second it.
okay, so my motion would be that this, oh,
Amendment, sorry, an amendment, yes.
can I amend it to say that this be referred to the grant and aid process? No.
Mr. Berry, that's not. I'll let you think about it and
Okay.
we'll move on. Director Yoni Donato and then Director Day.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think what I understood from the report and also from the speakers that came and presented to us, that this would be the first step. So this will come back to committee. We're thinking way into the future of this and making up stuff that hasn't even been presented to us. I think that letters of support that we read in their application, and emergency preparedness in particular was really surprising. I mean, now that there would be wildfires, like the climate that's changing and the way airports could be used. I didn't see this as a CVRD initiative at all. I looked at it as a feasibility study through economic development to see the possibilities. And then, of course, we always would have an opportunity later. But I would be in support of this resolution. I would have preferred the simpler one, but anyway.
Thank you. Director Day?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at this whole issue as more of from a visionary looking forward, that I think air transportation is just going to go to increase more and more and more. I think the more I live my life here and the things I see happening around me just on television and on the media are just, it's all coming true. So with that, and from what Mr. Evans said, there's planes taking off and dropping in all over the place in the region, and I think this could be a very valuable effort to figure out what's going to happen, what's happening now, and what economic benefit it would be, and what kind of a service it would be for the community. Not that we need to become involved with it, but I think it's good that we jump in at this point and find out what's going on, what the future is going to look like, to see if we can get it organized, because I'm not a big fan of planes dropping in and out of everywhere and creating all that activity. If we can just, and then it becomes, when it gets to that stage, as Mr. Blackwell says, that it's about an aerodrome, and that's not our responsibility, but that's when the real rubber hits the road and figuring out what's best for this type of activities. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Sebring?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going back to the staff report that was presented at Regional Services this morning under the financial considerations, and I'm trying to get a process thing straight in my head here, because I have some sympathy with the notion of kicking this, and like voting down this motion and kicking it down the field for a grant and aid process. Within its 2019 budget, and I'm reading from the report, EDC has recommended $25,000 from its current $114,299 operating reserve be dedicated to this. If we go with grant and aid, can that money come from this fund, or does it have to come from general
from the grant
requisition grant
yeah,
need? So if we do it that way, it's a direct hit on taxpayers rather than going into a reserve fund. I'm just trying to get that straight in my head. Okay, I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. Director Jackson?
Thank you. I am in favor of this for all the reasons that Director Day just mentioned. And I really liked Director Kuhn's suggestion earlier today that maybe we should write letters to Promac and Timber West and asking them perhaps for some money, so to offset the cost for the CVRD. I mean, they will very likely benefit from such an airstrip if it were ever built in the future. So let's ask them for some money.
Okay, thank you. I see no more hands up. Oh, Director Acton?
Wouldn't that be the role of the applicant or the air club to go out and ask for money? I don't think CVRD does that. So that's why I'm kind of feeling like they haven't put in enough into this. They've come and asked us for some help with this, and they could have done the first phase, so I will be voting against it.
Okay, I would like to call the question. All those in favor and opposed? We have Directors Acton, Sebring, Marcotte, and Dory opposed. The motion carries. Okay, thank you, Director Yanni DiNardo. We are moving on to staff reports. Mr. Berry.
First staff report from the Economic Development Division regarding a tech training rural dividend fund application, and a recommendation that the rural dividend fund application for $16,000 to support the Economic Development Cowichan Tech Training Initiative detailed in the Economic Development Division September 18th, 2018 staff report be approved.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Sebring. Any question on this? All in favor and opposed, motion carries.
Second report from the Legislative Services Division regarding the results of the AAP alternative approval process for bylaw 4205. That was the Cobble Hill Village Sewer System Service Establishment bylaw. And there's a recommendation that the certificate of results for the alternative approval process for adoption of bylaw 4205 be received.
It's moved by Director Davis, seconded by Director Morrison. Any question? All in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Berry. And moving to public hearings.
There's a public hearing report and minutes and exhibit regarding bylaw 4225, South Cowichan zoning amendment bylaw 145 Okotoks Drive, and a recommendation that those documents be received.
Moved by Director Davis, seconded by Director Day. All in favor and opposed, motion carries. Okay, now your favorite.
My favorite. Moving on to the bylaws, first set, all directors vote on these. Bylaw 4187, Area A, Malahat Critical Location Street Lighting Service Amendment, requisition limit increase, first three readings.
Moved by Director Davis, seconded by Director Morrison. Any question on this? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
And bylaw 4187 for adoption.
Moved by Director Davis, seconded by Director Acton. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Bylaw 4191, Woodley Range Water System Service Amendment, a requisition limit increase, first three readings.
Moved by Director Marcotte, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any question on this? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
And bylaw 4191 for adoption.
Moved by Director Marcotte, seconded by Director Day. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Bylaw 4192, Shellwood Water System Requisition Limit Increase, first three readings.
Moved by Director Marcotte, seconded by Director Davis. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
And bylaw 4192 for adoption.
Moved by Director Marcotte, seconded by Director Acton. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Bylaw 4193, Carlton Water System Requisition Limit Increase, first three readings.
Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Davis. Any question? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
And bylaw 4193 for adoption.
Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Bylaw 4205, Cobble Hill Village Sewer System Establishment be adopted.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Acton. Any question on this? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Bylaw 4234, Five-Year Financial Plan Amendment Bylaw, first three readings.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Morrison. Any question on this? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
And bylaw 4234 for adoption.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Jackson. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
And bylaw 4236, Soil Deposit Bylaw, first two readings.
Moved by Director Davis, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any question? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
The next set of bylaws, electoral area directors only. Bylaw 4118, South Cowichan zoning amendment, cannabis regulations be adopted.
Moved by Director Davis, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any question? Director Acton?
Yeah, I was wondering if there was any staff to talk to this bylaw just for a minute. I know this is the last reading, but I did have someone contact me and they were really concerned about the implications. And it's been all the things that we've been trying to avoid, they mentioned as being the implications of putting this bylaw in place. Could we have just,
Are you able to repeat those concerns?
I don't know.
It would be easier for staff to respond to potential. Do you recall? Mr. Blackwell, are you getting up to? Now, if you whisper in my ear, we're going to get a complaint about this. So it was a public hearing? Yes. So we're not taking further
I'm not allowed to
input?
say anything
Yeah.
at this point?
Thank you. That's
Okay.
that whisper was okay. So just for everybody's information, that once we hold a public hearing, we're not allowed to take further comments from the public. Yeah. So, sorry, can't help you on that. Okay, I'd like to call the question. All those in favor and opposed, motion carries.
Bylaw 4119, Area B, cannabis regulations be adopted.
Moved by Director Davis, seconded by Director Marcotte. All in favor, opposed, motion carries.
Bylaw 4120, Area D, cannabis regulations be adopted.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Nicholson, I think. All in favor, opposed, motion carries.
Bylaw 4121, Area E, cannabis regulations be adopted.
Moved by Director Nicholson, seconded by Director Morrison. All in favor, Opposed, motion carries.
4122, Area F, cannabis regulations for adoption.
Moved by Director Morrison, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. All in favor? Opposed, motion carries.
4123, Area G, cannabis regulations for adoption.
Moved by Director Dory, seconded by Director Davis. All in favor? Opposed, motion carries.
Bylaw 4124, Area H, cannabis regulations for adoption.
Moved by Director Nicholson, seconded by Director Dory. All in favor? Opposed, motion carries.
And bylaw 4225, South Cowichan zoning amendment, 145 Okotoks Drive, third reading.
Moved by Director Davis, seconded by Director Nicholson. All in favor? Opposed, motion carries.
That's it for the bylaws.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, through to Director Davis, Area I zoning amendment bylaw was adopted at the last board meeting.
Yeah. And I don't want this board to descend into how special Director Kuhn is, or whether he has special needs. So we're going to move on to question period, because we have no new business. If anyone in the audience would like to ask a question, you're welcome to come forward now.
Thank you,
Yes,
Mr. Chair. I mentioned at the public input period about whispered conversations and whether or not this is indeed part of an open and transparent way of doing business at this table, particularly when whispered conversation appears to have changed the outcome of a recommendation by staff. And is this appropriate? Is this an appropriate way to do business?
Thank you. And I think you're absolutely in the right if you're talking about information that affects the conversation and the debate at the table should be kept at the table. And we constantly have to remind ourselves not to make that debate happen by email, for instance. So I would equate it with that, and I think you're right to remind us of that.
Thank you. If I may, just one other conversation towards the airport study. I believe that the Duncan Flying Club is within Area E. Area E is undergoing their official community plan review, and the perception to the public may be that this proposal is to expand at their current location. And I think it is vitally important, and I hope that you would agree with that the public is consulted early on.
Thank you. Just remind you that the actual report refers specifically to public consultation being part of the process.
Yeah, early on, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to ask a question? Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, on the airport question, are we not getting out of our field? Because I see helicopters landing just about any place they want. And one instance in particular, I was on near the Forestry Service on the highway near Mill Bay in Cobble Hill. And I was doing some work on the farm, and the helicopter came in regularly to the Forest Service, and all the animals just go crazy when that helicopter comes in. So I don't see anything about landing strips in our OCP. I think this is out of our control, is it not?
So as the information was provided earlier, there's federal jurisdiction over aerodromes, and we've run into that municipally and otherwise many times. But what has been proposed today is a feasibility study for an airport. So that's something that is within our jurisdiction to consider.
Is there anything in our OCPs about airports?
I don't know the different OCPs well enough to answer that. Mr. Blackwell is shaking his head, so I suspect there's no mention of it.
Mr. Chair, my question is is should we be looking at places where helicopters can land and not land because of how they're disturbing livestock and local businesses?
I'm going to take that as a suggestion to the members of this board and let them think about that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question? I don't think there's anybody else would step forward. So we need a motion to move into closed session in 5 minutes. Moved by Director Stone, second by Director Davis. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.